G'day, welcome to the Australian Property Podcast. I'm Pete Wargent from Alan Wargent Property Buyers. I'm here with Chris Bates from the Alcove Mortgages Group. G'day, Chris. How's your week been?
Oh, doing well, Pete. I had a pretty lovely long weekend, actually, up at the Blue Mountains. Great time of year to go up there in October, and yeah, cracking weather. When kids actually survived a 6.5K hike, which is probably one of the best hikes I've ever done, to be honest. It was called the Grand Canyon track. If anyone's ever done that, it's like going to another world when you get deep in the canyon. But yeah, awesome weekend. But obviously back to a short week this week. Yeah, not much really happening at work, I would say, that's, surprising us. I mean, it's school holidays, right? So there's always a little bit of a lull, I feel, with a lot of buyers sort of go away, got to get the kids through school, and then they come back, say, next week. And it's going to be interesting to see if we get many listings, next week and the week after. It's kind of like that time where you might see that final flood of fresh listings on the market. But yeah, still a few upgraders around, but a few upgraders are in the market. They've made offers, but you've got vendors, price expectations a little bit too high as well. And so, in the Sydney market per se, there's a little bit of that going on as well. So it's not all gung-ho on the higher end where everyone's just willing to put in big offers. There is a little bit of trying to make it work rather than a FOMO market. What's been happening up there for you, Pete?
I'm not surprised to hear that it was a bit quieter because it seems, I think everybody was on holiday this weekend, or at least it seemed that way on the Sunshine Coast. And it actually seemed as though a lot of people took an extra day or two as well. Absolutely packed up here. So, yeah, I think maybe the rest of the country just slowing down a bit as people took advantage of the long weekend. Of course, Queensland in general has had a massive 2 or 3 weeks with cleaning up in all the different sporting codes, women's NRL, men's rugby league, AFL. So there's been a bit of drinking going on as well, I think, in these parts. And I think just the Queensland economy in general, I think is just it's just very busy. I think I was reading this week, Warren Hogan, formerly he was chief economist over at ANZ, he was saying that Queensland economy, the current trend of growth will overtake Victoria to be the second largest state economy by 2042. And I can well believe it. You can just see the dynamism and the wealth around in southeast Queensland. You can just feel it, really. So yeah, I guess the downside is it was just been very hard for us as buyers agents to secure good properties at the moment. The number of properties for sale in Brisbane is the lowest since before the global financial crisis. So it just keeps on getting tighter. And I guess as a byproduct of that, we've missed out on a fair few, which is always frustrating as a buyer's agent when you go through all the due diligence. You think you've found a property you really want, and then you end up getting outbid or missing out, and you're kind of back to square one. So yeah, I guess, it's certainly been very busy around southeast Queensland, but I think partly as a function of the long weekend. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether we get more stock coming on between now and Christmas, because, yeah, it's not, it's not even really that far away. A few more weeks and we'll be starting to think about the wind down.
Yeah, and I think there's still a huge battle going on, which is going to be one of our first stories this week around the YIMBY versus NIMBY sort of debate. Next week, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on migration. I feel like whenever we do posts on YouTube, etc., we get a lot of heat because a lot of people are just blaming migration for all our housing problems. And I think it's wise to see if we can unpick and actually talk about the facts about what's actually causing this housing crisis, but also, what role migration's playing within that. So next week we'll cover that, won't we, Pete?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yes, we've had big migration over the past few years, but part of the challenge has been getting houses built quickly enough because after the lockdowns and the stimulus, the cost of construction, the cost of trades and materials, it's all gone shooting higher, and that's just stymied the supply response. So yeah, I think there's a lot been in the news actually the last week or two about allowing more housing to be built. It'd be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next decade. I suppose the YIMBYs would argue that just allowing more supply will bring down housing prices and rents. The skeptics say, yeah, maybe in the short term that could happen, but we still need people to build the homes, and investors still need to have an adequate return. So yeah, there's competing forces, I guess, but you can see the direction of travel has definitely been towards allowing more housing to be built. That's just seems to be where the big push is on at the moment. So yeah, definitely a tug of war going on. and which is always hard in the sort of affluent Sydney suburbs because people always intuitively want to push back against change, I suppose, just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, not too much change with rates this week, Pete, right? So we're still not expecting, much further in terms of easing coming into sort of 2026. And I think that's kind of slowed down. I think a little bit of momentum in the market, I would say, because a lot of upgraders will be saying, well, if rate cuts aren't going to come, thick and fast next year, do I sort of also just sit on my hands? And so while it might, counterintuitively, you might think, oh, the market's not going to run because demand's going to slow. I think what's going to happen is I think listings are going to stay really tight coming into next year. It's one of those times a year where often buyers are starting to think about what are they going to do next year. And so if they don't start to put plans in place, between now, get their place ready for sale, they've got to organize trades. There's a real lack. It takes time to list your property, right? So I reckon this sort of cooling off of rate cuts is basically going to lead into early next year to be, still a dire number of listings, particularly in the housing market.
Yeah, so Westpac actually released their consumer sentiment survey this week, and it showed consumer confidence kind of fell back a little bit to lowest in 6 months. And that was mainly due to people not expecting as much in terms of interest rate cuts or monetary easing. House price expectations rose again, so that's a fresh 15-year high. And I think, there's it's kind of cause and effect here, isn't it? Because the RBA is clearly on alert. Housing credit growth has accelerated. For investors, it's at decade highs. And I think the RBA is just keeping half an eye on what's happening in the housing market, certainly as investors come back in. But yeah, I guess from a consumer perspective, it's just going to sort of feed into a bit more caution, and that consumer recovery could be a bit fragile. I think the other thing is, as you said, part of the way that monetary policy works, lower interest rates help to stimulate the housing market and particularly housing construction. And if interest rates are going to stay higher than was otherwise assumed, that doesn't really help the supply response. So, it's a bit of a feedback loop, I suppose. But that's where things are at. I wouldn't be expecting too much more easing in this cycle, the way things have been going, just in terms of, most of the data seems to be just picking up, I suppose. We'll see how that plays out. But maybe we get another rate cut or two, but it feels like a fairly shallow cycle from here.
Yeah, and obviously the investor market is still really strong. I think the data is sort of coming out more and more each month, and I think people are starting to realize, oh, hang on a sec, investors have been quite active buying into the market over the last couple of years and really driving, a lot of the credit growth, particularly a lot of the upgraders aren't in the market. So you've got first home buyers, which is probably on the lower end, and, investors. And so, that's sort of, but it's just the investors aren't buying where they used to buy. They are a little bit starting to go back to the capital cities and buy where the first home buyers are buying because they want to take advantage of this, where they're getting access to the 5% deposits. But often they're still looking at more of the affordable, the outskirts of capital cities, regional locations, due to sort of the higher interest rates and, higher yields in these locations. And not to say that's what I'd be doing personally, but I think that's where a lot of investors are going. And so we're changing the rental stock, which leads into one of the other stories, Pete, which is, rental vacancies is just tight, right? And, we're seeing rents start to reaccelerate, which is not great news when you're looking at inflation.
No, in fact, yes, the housing component has been one of the factors that's drove inflation higher. So a reacceleration of rents is bad news for renters, but it's actually not great from the Reserve Bank's perspective either, because we thought inflation had got back in the box, but maybe there's just a bit more to come. So I would certainly be keeping a close eye on that. So let's run through our big three property news stories of the week. So if you're not familiar, we do this every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. in your podcast player. We go through the big three property news stories, and then we also do a listener Q&A segment at the end. So stick around for that, and also do send in your questions because we do like to cover them each week. So first story this week that we already alluded to, a fairer future for the Inner West. So the mayor in the Inner West in Sydney announced 20 to 30,000 new homes for the Inner West by increasing density over the next 15 years. Some of the small print, a 3% affordable housing requirement. Yeah, I guess some people might argue that's not much, 3%, but I think there's always a trade-off with this stuff. You need developers to be incentivized to build. And just a general experience seems to be that sometimes if you require a much higher affordable housing share, it comes with challenges within the development. Particularly if you've got a big share of people who have no vested interest in the upkeep of the development, it sometimes causes problems later on. So I guess that's part of the thinking by only having about sort of a 3% affordable housing share. I suppose the big argument that's sort of taking shape between the macroeconomists and the property economists is, will this actually start to have an impact to cool off rents? If we start seeing places like Mossburn or the Inner West allowing more density, more housing. I mean, Mossburn is not an LGA where that's normally been allowed. I suppose the sort of YIMBY's argument, and I know you've had Peter Tulip on the podcast a time or two, would say, well, yes, we can lower housing costs by just allowing more density across the capital cities in areas where the supply has been constrained. I suppose the counter argument has been, it's kind of hard to lower housing costs because, somebody's going through a renovation at the moment. You realize that it's very hard. You can't automate a lot of this stuff. You've got architects, you've got councils sticking their oar in. You've got to have, site engineers and construction engineers. Then you've got to get the builders, the trades, the materials. You can't outsource. You can't really outsource the labor to Asia or somewhere with cheaper labor. You need local tradies. And one of the things I just picked up traveling around Perth and Melbourne is a lot of the tradies, people are graduating and are starting on 180k because they can go and work on big infrastructure projects. So yes, we can allow for more housing. The question is, will it get built and at what price? So I suppose those are the competing arguments. So Chris, just to wrap up, my gut feel is that yes, over the long term, if you allow more zoning, presumably that would really help with the supply response. But also, I guess, just we've seen in Brisbane, there's lots of places you could build in Brisbane, but they're just not being built out because it's just not cost effective at the moment. So, what's your take on, how YIMBYism could impact the housing market?
I do think it's a bit of a change in the old philosophy around just building on greenfield estates. Just as our cities get bigger and bigger, there's still more supply. For example, in Sydney and in southwest and northwest Sydney, there's more farms where you can convert to housing. Whether that in itself is a good plan, particularly some areas that are prone to flood. They highlighted that over the last few years. So this typical response of just cutting up farms and building 300-400 square meter blocks and putting on houses and, often with not too many trees, is that really the best option? I mean, we can still have that as part of our housing supply, but is that just the only option? Well, no, we've got to consider others. And so we've got no land left. What are you going to start taking out, national parks and turning into housing? There's a big argument that's not a good idea. And so then you've got to really say, well, we've got to really use our current land a bit wiser. And I think that you can put all your high rises in one little pocket, but you've got to argue, is that really the best idea, or are you better to sort of spread it across the city? And, just due to things like roads and sewerage and all the things that, require. And so I would say that's been our old philosophy is, greenfield estates and high density apartments in, one postcode. And I just don't think that's practical just to continue on that model. I think we've got to potentially shift it. And I think what the issue people have is that, and it's not fair. I think a lot of the new dwellings are just happening in parts of the city, and other parts of the city aren't pulling their weight because they're arguing that, that there's no room for other people, which I just don't think that's fair. And if, for example, right now that you can't make it feasible to build in certain pockets, i.e. high density apartments in, some pockets are really hard to make profitable. The sale price plus the cost of, minus off the cost to build plus the cost to own the land, etc. There's just no profit. So developers aren't going to build. So if we wait for those building prices to go down, good luck. Or if you wait for prices to go up, that's not good for anyone. So you're just not going to see any building happening. And so this time it also makes sense, I think, to go where the builders can still add stock to the market, but do it in a way that isn't hurting the livability of a suburb. Yeah, there's going to be more people, but that might also mean that you get some more retail. You might get some more cafes. You might get a little bit more different demographics in a suburb. Often. Maybe you encourage more families into the market, or maybe you get more downsizers to finally sell up their house that they've got 4 empty bedrooms. And then that house then maybe turns into some apartments or some, townhouses that families can move into. And so I think we're just going to have to try to create some more stock in the market. And even if properties are getting built in Mossman or Rose Bay or, Edgecliff or wherever it might be, I think that's good, because I do think that, they often will get built with a much higher standard. A lot of people say they're going to get built with building issues, and no, these apartments are going to get done for the owner-occupier market, and they're going to have to be nicely designed to get through, and B, I do think they're going to be built well with high-quality materials and very little defects compared to, say, the last boom of 2015, where it was all getting sold to overseas investors in a lot of cases. And so, that's my take on it, Pete, is that I do think, holding for the status quo of what happened before is just not going to work for a city, as we have to evolve as our city gets bigger.
I think that's the missing ingredient, isn't it? I think if you look at a city like Brisbane, which I'm probably most familiar with, there's loads of places that high-rise could be built, like Hamilton, North Shore, or, there's stacks of places across the city like Toowong or the Valley or the South Bank, West End. There's loads of places where you could build high-rise, but actually, when you look at it, most people don't want to live in high-rise. Where the demand is really sort of more family-appropriate housing. And I think, as you said, yes, Greenfield Estates is one option. If you look at Caboolture and places like that, we're building a lot of it, or Ipswich, but yeah, we can't build that fast enough, but also it's miles away. And what's really missing is good sort of townhouse options in the middle rings. If we could supply more of that, people would buy it for sure, because they want accessibility to amenities. And I guess, they're probably less keen on living on the 10th floor of a tower block. But if you could get something where you've got your own front door and maybe a 3-bedroom townhouse, there would be loads of demand for that, especially in a city with some affordability challenges now. So, yeah, I guess that's the debate that's going to be ongoing over the next decade or so. I think the government's housing target of 1.2 million homes in 5 years, is turned to dust effectively. 240,000 a year. We've done it once in history in 1 year. I don't know whether on a sort of sustainable, repeatable basis, whether that's possible. And that was only achieved by building a stack of high-rise that was sold mostly to Chinese investors. I just don't know that in this cycle it's going to be achievable on a sort of an ongoing basis, unless we make some serious changes to zoning and maybe red tape. I saw in the UK, actually, Conservative Party conference, they pledged to remove stamp duty entirely. And I think, maybe that's another thing that might need to be looked at, is just the amount of taxes and red tape that's involved in the housing market. It could help to free up more downsizes, for example. Let's take a look at the second news story of the week. This is interesting, Chris, because you said things haven't necessarily been any busier. It's a story that was in the Fin Review and elsewhere. Unprecedented demand on the first day of the first home buyer scheme. It was one of those sort of phones ringing off the hook type articles. Mortgage brokers saying they'd never seen so many people phoning up. Some interesting analysis, which sort of maps back to what buyers agents are telling me. Nerida Conisbee, Ray White said that prices will rise in the bottom quartile of the market. And yeah, that's certainly, when I was in Melbourne, that's what buyers agents were telling me, is that prices are moving. The median price might not have changed that much because people are transacting at lower prices. But actually, if you look at like-for-like sales in the bottom of the market, there's competition between first-home buyers and investors. So, it's creating a bit of pressure there. And I suppose, what economists are saying is, well, yes, okay, you can throw first-home buyer fuel on the fire, but it's not really fixing supply. I think Tim Reardon at the HIA says, they can, at least over the medium or longer term, it could help with supply. But I do think in the short term, there is a lot of pressure at that bottom end of the market. Have you seen any sort of change in customer patterns or inquiry?
Oh, look, I think that was in August and September. I sort of laugh when I read these articles. It's like one day of data, and they write an article that was of one anecdotal mortgage broker that lodged 3 applications on one day. It's just, it's a bit comical. We also, they've done articles very similar on buyers agents in the past that have had unprecedented demand, and you look at it and they're talking about a week. So, but I do think that, August, September, we did see quite a big uplift of first home buyers, and a lot of people who have done strategies with us over the last, 1 to 2 years, I would say, have sort of come back, or they've readjusted their pre-approvals, or they now want to get going because they know they might miss the boat. But, I sort of look at the time now and the clock, and, if you're not really in the market now, you've got to be, you might find that over the next end of October, more people still want to enter, but they're going to enter in November, and there's going to be very little listings. So I think, the real challenge will be that we'll see a lot of demand, I think, in terms of a lot of first home buyers. We'll get, because data will come out maybe over the next 1 to 2 months. We already sort of saw that. CoreLogic's data came out this week, and it was pretty strong uplift in the sort of the growth rate across our city and, across the country, really. And I think as that gets factored in, the media jumping on it, and all of a sudden they're talking about these prices running up a little bit like the investor credit growth. So that'll then encourage first home buyers to say, oh, actually, it is actually going up. Maybe I do need to get in. So I'd be worried about trying to buy in sort of February time. That would be my concern for first home buyers. And if you're not in the market now and you're trying to enter in February, I think that's when we're going to see this sort of real challenge for first home buyers trying to buy, because everyone's going to come out of the Christmas break re-energized and wanting to make it happen. And particularly if you're buying around the caps, you could very easily see that the areas that you want to buy quickly jump above the maximum cap limits in your city, whether it's, around the country. So, I think it's a bit of a furphy, this article. It's just trying to get something out.
Hey, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Chris. You'll be thrilled to hear. So Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Michelle Bullock said government policies to expand housing supply will take more than 2 years to have an impact. So we can see, it's not difficult to see, we're in a chronic housing shortage. Rental vacancies lowest on record. Listings, depending on which city you're living in, probably the lowest in 15 years. Depends where in the country. But
Yeah.
so there's a couple of conflicting or sort of arguments or views. Scott Pay, Barefoot Investor, wrote an article quite derisory about the 5% deposit scheme as a policy, because it's just going to bring first-time buyers in. It's a bit risky because you've only got 5% skin in the game, and it's just going to push up prices. And I think, well, most economists would agree with that. I was just reading an email in Mel Brown's newsletter this week. So she did her event in Sydney last week, Her Wealth, Her Way, which was a hugely well-attended event, which was excellent to see. Now, she's saying, yes, points taken, but if you're a first home buyer, you've got the opportunity to buy with 5% deposit. It might otherwise take you several years, or if not, you might never save 20%. That's what people used to traditionally recommend back in the day to be safe and to avoid mortgage insurance. And she's saying, look, if you've got the opportunity, you can afford to buy somewhere, just take the 5% deposit, and really seriously think about using it. What do you say to clients who come to you and say, look, I've got 5%. Do I try and save more? Do I just use it straight away and try and build up a buffer? You're a sort of a broker, and you must deal with that, you must deal with that scenario. What sort of advice do you give normally?
So I think two things can be true at the same time, right? So what Scott's saying is and Shane Oliver's come out and said it, and heaps of people have come out and said how crazy this 5% deposit scheme is, right? And it's going to bring in for future first home buyer demand. But the reality is it's happening, right? So the system has whether you agree with it or not, I agree with what they're saying. It's only going to bring forward future demand. It's only going to increase house prices and property prices, and it's only going to hurt future generations. It's going to get harder for them to enter because they're going to have to pay a higher price. And even people who enter in 6 months' time are going to pay a higher price than they would have, earlier. And so, yeah, that's all true. We agree with that. But then, and your personal situation, what do you do to set your family up? You still need to worry about that as well. And if this is an opportunity for you to start to potentially build wealth or get home security or stability for your future and take advantage of it, and you're one of the lucky ones that can, and you're not, say, for example, having to wait 1 or 2 years down the line, then, why wouldn't you have a go at it? I don't think, first home buyers have had the best, compared to other generations. They're entering at a point much higher prices than anyone else. So, they do need these sort of leg ups. But the problem is, all as a country, we're just kicking the can down the road. That's the issue, right? Like is this really solving the problem? No, but it is solving the problem, or for some people who want to buy over the next couple of years. And so, yeah, I think that's the issue, right? What's the say? Don't hate the system, or hate the player, hate the game, that sort of line. So, yeah, you can hate the system, but doesn't mean you shouldn't play in it. And I've seen that's the issue here, I think. But the key thing is that just because you can get access to a 5% deposit doesn't mean that every property across the country is going to go up. And so you can just go, shooting a sort of gun and just hit whatever property you want and you'll be fine. I do think you still need to be really careful, particularly if you're going into the apartment markets in our capital cities, and making sure that you buy a good asset. And you do need to play it smart, because, yeah, you've got an opportunity, but you are taking a 95% mortgage, like Scott said there. And yeah, it may still go up because you've got unprecedented demand, coming from first-time buyers. But if you then hold it for, say, 3, 5, 7 years, you might find there's a huge opportunity cost if you're just buying a poor asset versus buying something that was a much better bet. And the second thing is, I would try to buy something that gives you a bit of a longer runway, because you've got a smaller deposit. Your ability to sort of sell it and take a meaningful gain out of that to then go buy something else is going to be harder, just because you've got a smaller deposit. And so try to buy something you can grow into, and ideally buy something and that often means you have to make lifestyle compromises. And so, you might have to weigh that up, because you have to move further away than where you want to live now because you're renting, but you bought something that you could live in for a number of years. And so, yeah, that would be my take on it, Pete. Yeah, don't just go and buy any property, but also, if you've got the ability to take advantage of it, why not? Because the leverage return on that is going to beat any other investment likely, unless you're buying like an individual stock that booms or crypto or something. It's very hard to beat the leverage return of property, particularly if it's tax-free because it's your home. And if you put in a 5% deposit and it goes up 20%, well, you haven't just made 20% return on your money. You're more like maybe like 300 or 400%, right? Because your 5% is now worth, say, 25%, right? So, obviously there's fees and things like that, but it's very hard to beat the leverage return of property if you get it right.
Sound advice, I think, as well. Try not to experience too much FOMO. There's certainly those articles out there about unprecedented demand, but the plural of anecdote is not data. I think sometimes you just got to, try and take a more sanguine view about what's going on in the world. Let's do one more story before we do our listener Q&A from Anthony Keane in the Australian. Should greedy property investors be blamed for the housing crisis? So he said about 20% of taxpayers own an investment property. That's down a bit over the past decade, which is a bit of a surprise, I guess. I think a lot of people actually end up owning a rental because they bought a first home, and then later on they partner up and buy somewhere else, and they end up as almost an accidental landlord. 85,000 taxpayers own 4 or more investment properties, so it's only about 0.3% of Australians by population. I think there's definitely an argument to say that investors seem to buy more pro-cyclically these days, which is funny, because as an investor, I try to buy when everybody's panicking and, everyone's sick. Nobody wants to buy. Like I bought in a unit in Brisbane in 2017 when everyone was saying it's like the worst possible place. It's ground zero for the Australian property crash and stuff. And as soon as I saw the headlines like that, I'm like, well, surely if there's ever a time to buy a new farm, this is going to be it. And likewise with Geelong years ago, when all the car industries were being shut down. And so it's like you try and buy the point of maximum pessimism. But it seems like as a cohort, investors these days, they see a market booming and they pile in. So I can certainly understand the sentiment of people blaming investors for amplifying cycles, accentuating the housing crisis. In the UK, I mentioned the Green Party wants to ban landlords outright. I don't think they'll ever be elected, but they could be part of a coalition maybe, and that pressurizes the government in that direction. But it makes you wonder then, like, well, how would that even work? Who would own the rentals? Is it does the government start owning the rental stock? And if so, how do they go about acquiring it? What's the cost? I without doubt, some investors are greedy. And I can certainly see how if I was a first home buyer struggling to get onto the ladder, I would be very keen to see investor subsidies wound back. But yeah, I suppose in the end, people are just rational actors, and they sort of invest where the returns are. And I'm not sure that sort of banning landlords outright would help. But yeah, what's your take on that, Chris?
Look, I think we've got a rental crisis, right? So who's going to provide the rental housing? Is it going to be mum and dad or investors buying residential property, or is it going to be the government, or is it going to be corporations? And I think that there's real issues with the government providing it. Have they got enough money to, $3 trillion is probably what our investor rental supply is. Can they really move the needle there? Can they go and build, hundreds of billions of dollars of property and own it? I don't think so. I don't think corporations can sort of also do it. And so if you start to really reduce, incentives to invest in property for, for mums and dads, basically, or, Australian taxpayers, I do think that they will do other things with their money, right? And so you have to say, do they put that money into super? Well, no, there's limits on super. And they don't want to buy, residential property because maybe there's rule changes to the tax breaks there. So what they might do? They might go put it all into their home. And so you might find that you create more owner-occupied demand because people say, well, I need to do something for my future. I'll actually buy a better house because they know that grow's going to grow for me tax-free. And so I think you just got to always know. And then what's that unintended consequences? You get higher house prices and less rental supply. I think the real issue came maybe back in 2014, 15, I would say, when you could leverage your income so far into investors. And I would say it's quite risky lending that was happening because people were able to get such long-term interest-only loans, leverage their income way past what they could afford, and basically, get 10, 12, 14 times their income. I do think in the recent times, we've seen a bit of trust lending where people are basically able to keep on buying investment properties if they've got a bit of cash with lower LVR sort of properties, buying at sort of 70%, et cetera, putting in trust and then buying another one, another one, another one. But a lot of people can't afford to do that just due to the amount of equity that you need. But I do think it's going to be watch this space. If we do see a reacceleration of really relaxed lending to investors, you've got to say, look, hang on, is this fair that this person could just keep on leveraging their income to the nth degree and really pushing out people who haven't got the wealth or the income to afford to invest and just making inequality worse? But I think just because lending's got so much tighter over the last, particularly the 5 years, but I would say over the last 10 years, I think that sort of investors are causing the housing crisis is not really sort of the reason. There's a lot of new investors coming and maybe they're creating little mini house crises, I would say, down the line in, say, regional areas where their prices of property have gone past what the locals can afford, or locals are getting pushed out. But in the capital cities, they're not really driving prices higher. A lot of it's driven by owner-occupier demand, I would say.
Yeah, fair. There's always two sides to this thing. As somebody who's been a homeowner, the renter, an investor, there's always different angles, and it depends on your stage in life as well. So we've just got time for a couple of your listener questions before we finish for the week. So this one's from the listener Pain in the Ass. Yes, very good. It's a bit like the old Simpsons joke, isn't it? Phone call for IP freely. Thanks for the amazing content. I have a question regarding the first-time super saver scheme. Let's say I put in 10K after tax into super. I've got a marginal tax rate of 30%. At tax time, I can claim a deduction for my 10K. I get 3K back from the ATO, i.e. tax already paid on the 10K. And then my 10K is taxed at 15% inside super. So technically, I'll have access to 8,500 when I aim to withdraw my first home purchase. So yeah, it's a slightly convoluted way of phrasing it, but basically, yeah, the reason the first home super saver scheme is tax effective, to my understanding, is that if you're contributing up to the concessional cap, which I think is 30,000 this year, then it's going to be more tax effective to have your money in super as a contribution. And as you said, in super, you won't get taxed at more than 15%. So I guess the answer to the question is yes, Chris. Do you have many clients who use the first home super saver scheme at all?
I would say that it's one of those things that a lot of people don't know about. And, you can do up to 50K in it. If you're a couple, that's 100, right? So it's a really good option to build a deposit. But, because you can only put in 15K a year, it's like if you start now, the tax date, and you want to enter the market now with a 5% deposit, like, what's the benefit? It's only going to be a small, and it works in tax years as well. So now it's October, so it's like you can't even kind of do this little arbitrage over sort of June and July, which I think it's one of those things. If you've been aware of this and you've been doing it for the last 3-4 years, I think it's added up to quite a big benefit, particularly if you've done it with a partner. It's just when you want to use it, when you've got a 5% deposit and you don't really, and you want to enter quite soon, the benefit's quite little. But yeah, it's a great policy. I mean, I was very frustrated when it came out back in, would have been like I don't remember, was it
2017, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So like 9 years ago, crazy. God, I feel old. But I mean, when that came out, I was like, why are you mixing superannuation and first home buyers? Like, saving your super fund should just be for your retirement. Don't mix that with buying a home. But I do think that, once you got calmed down and you start to say, well, how practically could I use this? And if I do this for a few years, I think those people who did take advantage of it have done quite well out of it. It's been a good way to save a deposit. But, it's really hard if you're wanting to enter the market now, because you can only really use it, up to 15K in a year. And so the benefits, it's still there, but it's not as big. Just be careful around all the withdrawal rules around it, and how it actually works at your super funds, and how to get, and when you actually have got to apply for it, there's definitely some sort of T's and C's around the process. You just want to be careful, and you can, they have made changes in terms of, if you put the money in and then you didn't buy a home, you've been able to get it out. So there's been some kinks in the way the policy worked that they've had to iron out over the last sort of 8 years, I guess. But it's a good scheme, but the benefit is quite limited.
Okay. All right. We've got one more question, then we'll finish for the week. From Inner Jam, the 5% deposit scheme, is the mainstream media wrong? The prevailing view in the mainstream media is that property prices will grow just below the price cap. So take Sydney with a price cap of 1.5 million. Then there'll be more demand around the price caps. But the question is, surely there'll be even more demand coming online at lower price points. So in other words, prices get impacted across the board, not just around the cutoff points. Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, that's what Westpac's survey is showing, isn't it? House price expectations at a 15-year high. That's because this is the reason we get property cycles. People expect prices to go up, so they think, well, I better buy because prices are going to go up, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So yes, there might be some distortion around the price caps, but I think actually if you look at the impacts, they do probably come right from the bottom of the market upwards. Is that what you would expect as well, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it'll start, under the caps. But then I do think naturally when someone sells that property, they do something with the proceeds. And what do they do with that? They upgrade into other caps, or they buy another investment property, or they pay off their home. And so there's these sort of second tier. So it's once that transaction happens, it creates another transaction. It reminds me a little bit when Dominic Perrottet in New South Wales removed, stamp duty for first home buyers up to 1.5. And they're like, oh yeah, that's going to create a lot of demand under 1.5. But what I ended up doing is creating a lot more demand in the sort of 2 and the 3 region as well, because a lot of people took those proceeds and then used that to then go upgrade because their apartment went from 1.3 to 1.5 overnight almost. And so, yeah, I do think, and it won't just be just at the end, at the top of those caps, because it's a lot of incomes, due to serviceability limits will buy well within those caps, and that'll push, a 600 to a 700. So, it'll be across the board, but also once those transactions happen, there'll be a second order of transactions that will happen with the proceeds. So I guess it's all the multiplier effects. What's on for the next week, Pete?
Oh, well, just for the weekend, it's my daughter's 11th birthday. So we're going out to Bells Creek to look at some camels and then going to the AFL. So the women's AFL goes on for a little while longer, so we've got that to go to, and then work. Yeah, we've got a couple of commercial searches underway at the moment, so that's keeping me busy. Most of the team focus on the resi stuff, and I help out with the commercial investment. So it always takes a bit of legwork to find good deals in commercial because it doesn't all get listed in the portals. So that's me over the next week or two. How about you?
My sister's having a baby. She was due last week, so any minute might even be happening right now. I'm not sure. But yeah, there'll be a little baby entering our little family. over the next couple of days. That's super exciting. Definitely by Sunday. So, I'll be an uncle next week. So I'm super excited about that.
One other shout out before we wrap up. I went down to the beach at Mooloolaba yesterday. Shout out to Nathan and his better half. Yeah, it was great to see his son came over and said he's 11 years old. He said, I've been listening to your podcast for 3 years. So there you go. Like, it's always a nice, do occasionally get stopped on the sunny coast by people who are tuning in. So it's always good to say good day to people around the traps as well. So good to see you guys.
Oh, very good. 11-year-old been listening to it for 3 years. Wow.
I know. Well, I think it was by force. He's just probably sitting in the back of the car.
I got you. Yeah,
not necessarily through choice.
Yeah, fair call. Yeah, he knows your voice. Oh, thanks. Oh, hi, Nathan. And appreciate the shout out. Awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll have a good chat next week.
Cheers. See you, everyone. See you next week.
Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you want to hear more from us, you can get daily videos and podcasts on Rask's YouTube channel. Or if you want to enroll in a free course on investing, property, business, money, you name it, you can join over 34,000 other students and enroll in a free course on the Rask website. Simply head to www.rask.com.au and follow the prompts. Thanks for watching this Rask podcast.